Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to the Awaited with my guest Dr. Chris Hewer, where we're talking about how we could convey an understanding of the Imam of our time, alayhi salam, and the doctrines related to him to Christians, since there will be, according to the narrations, Christians present at the time of the Imam's reappearance. And one other point, as that following on from where we broke off with the break, is that one Orthodox Christian Orthodox academic who I met said that your Islamic spirituality is virtually identical to my Christian spirituality. The concepts, the sort of underlying, cosmic concepts as well. And he said, if this whole idea of the journey of the soul, the progress of the soul, enlightenment, imbibing, the divine light, if this is basically virtually the same between at least the Orthodox tradition and the Islamic tradition, then what is in it for him? And this was his question to a number of Muslims who were present. He said, well, what you're saying about the journey of the soul, about the role of your imams is pretty much the same as what I have. I have a guide, Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, and I have this journey of the soul. And he is the transmitter of this divine light. He's the door to the divine light. So why should I? What is in it in Islam for me? How would we respond to that?
I think that we would want to start by saying God is at work in both these traditions. Therefore, it should come as no surprise to us that we see, as it were, the footsteps of God or the fingerprints of God within both systems. So we should not be surprised or afraid that we find a considerable amount of common ground, particularly on the level of what we could call the ascent of the soul.
Yeah.
Because this is not something which is tied down to an outer framework, but it is in a realm in which God is in control, and God can draw the human soul into different juxtapositions, different relationships with God, which can, as it were, call into question some of our nice, neat little spiritual packages.
Right.
So this will be the first thing to say. No surprise that you find lots of similarities. The second thing to say, and this is particularly important when we talk about the return of Imam al-Mahdi, because part of the Islamic tradition is clearly to say, yes, Jesus was a true prophet sent by God.
Yeah.
He was the bearer of a revelation from God, the Injil. Therefore, no Muslim can speak disparagingly of Jesus, the Injil, or his immediate Christian followers, his immediate family. But there is also part of the tradition that says Christians have, over the centuries, gone astray. Mm-hmm. They have gone off the mainline message. Indeed, the Quran calls us people of excess, people who have gone to extremes, you've gone over the top. Is it not enough that you have this wonderful prophet of Islam in Jesus, who is the bearer of guidance, the bearer of light, etc.? Why do you need to go to excess? And part of the mission of Imam al-Mahdi when he returns will be to restore some of that purity of tradition to the earlier traditions.
Yeah.
Now, this is not comfortable for Christians to hear, because if I thought that I had gone to excess in the way that Islam speaks of it, I would be a Muslim immediately.
Yeah.
What kind of an idiot would I be?
Yeah.
So this is one of those issues in which we have a degree of tension, we have a degree of, well, you're quite entitled to think that,
Yeah.
but it doesn't necessarily mean I have to agree with you. But there is that element of correction. It's there in the Quran, it's there in the life of Prophet Muhammad, it was there in his meeting with a delegation from Najran, it's there throughout the Islamic centuries, and we ought not to avoid it.
Just out of curiosity, again from the Christian perspective, with the reappearance of Jesus, alayhi salam, what is his role? What do Christians say his role is? Is it also corrective in some sense? I mean, does he, when he reappears, will it be in some similar way reminding Christians of an authentic message that from which they have gone astray, maybe?
In terms of Christian understanding of a second coming of Jesus, this is a very large and complex topic.
Right.
Because what seems to be pretty clear is that the immediate Christians who followed Jesus were expecting the end of the world to come at any moment.
Yeah.
Because the early writings, the earliest Christian writings that we have, the letters of Paul, for example, which are about 20 years or so after the death of Jesus, we see Paul writing to Christian communities and putting them right. There were people who were saying, there's no point in getting married because by the time children come, the end of the world will come.
Yeah.
And there were other people who were sitting down and saying, I'm not going to go and dig in the garden. I'm not going to plant the fields because the end of the world is going to come. And Paul is saying to them, steady yourselves up, get back there.
Right.
It's not for you to tell when. So there seems to have been this immediate expectation. And indeed that sense of the end of the world is coming has gone on through the Christian centuries right down to the present day. There were Christians who believed that with the coming of the year 2000, the end of the world would come. There are people who are expecting it to come imminently in the next few years. That is part of the Christian tradition. Just as it is within the Shi'a tradition or in the Islamic tradition in general of saying the Mahdi will come. And so of course we've seen in history people who have claimed to be the Mahdi because it's a way of raising up the people and getting them to rally to your banner. When it will happen, wait and see. What will happen? Well, that again is not clear, because people had to try to answer that question in the knowledge that actually it hasn't happened yet. And so people tended to go back into their scriptural tradition and say, well, what do we have within what Christians call the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures, which will help us to understand? And remember that we're talking often here about symbolic language, metaphorical language, literary language, rather than the language of physics. And so there was an understanding that the Jesus story is not yet finished.
Right.
It's yet to be told. And then there was, indeed, way before the Hebrew tradition, in the Zoroastrian tradition, there is a story of cycles of time which end with a sort of golden age in which peace will reign upon the earth and so on. And so some of the Christian scholars then in the very early period were drawing on this sort of tradition and applying it to Jesus.
Right.
Now, again, we're talking about a symbolic interpretation of an event which is indicated within the life and teaching of Jesus himself, but is by no means clearly defined and stated. There are sayings of Jesus in which he taught that the end time, let's define the end time. This is not a set number of years, it is a phase in the history of the creation, the history of humankind. That the end time comes, it begins with the time of Jesus.
Right.
And so we have a saying in one of the Gospels that I saw Satan fall from the sky. In other words, the age of Satan is now past. We have entered into the new age, the age of the revelation in Jesus.
Right, okay.
So there is a sense in which we are living the end days now. So Christian theology talks about the human being as the instrument, the tool by which God brings about the full impact of the end days in our society. How would you do that? Well, you can give an exact Islamic parallel. You live according to the guidance. You make it present by the way that you live. So if you want to bring the end times closer, you live as though they were already here. And this really is the sort of tension in which Christianity lives.
Right, that's interesting. So it seems, because I know that there are many narrations, obviously, in the Shi'a tradition about Jesus alayhi salam, things he said, and what his role will be. Just one of them, which is quite interesting, is where he says, it is said that he will say to the Mahdi, alayhi salam, I was raised as a minister, not as a commander. And perhaps we can talk about that a bit later, about their different roles. But it's interesting that this seems to clarify the nature of his role as well. Although from the Shia perspective, he is going to be joining the Imam in his work. It is still in this kind of ministerial position, rather than in the same role as the Imam, which is an interesting point to bear in mind.
It's a question of definition and redefinition.
Yeah.
Because there was an expectation amongst the Jewish people in the centuries before Jesus and in his own time that God would send the Messiah.
Yeah.
And the Messiah would be one who would liberate the people from the oppression of their time. So the idea of a liberator, saviour, Messiah was something that was well established long before the time of Jesus. Now, in Christian understanding, Jesus actually does that, but in an unexpected way. In other words, he is the Messiah, but he redefines the role of the Messiah. And he redefines it to a life of selfless suffering, of selfless self-giving, rather than to one of imperial liberator. And so that narration, I would understand, I come as minister, not as commander, is precisely a reflection of the turning on its head of the life and ministry of Jesus, in which he comes as a servant. I come amongst you as one who serves, he says, not as one who is served by others. So I would see him coming not as commander, as it were, shining knight
Yeah.
on white horse in armour, but rather as one who comes to serve, to teach the dignity of service and indeed the redemptive quality of service.
Thank you. And another very important point with regard to this is the reappearance of the Imam alayhi salam, would it be something that Christians should fear? I mean, when you do sort of, obviously go on the internet and you search around, you do find there is a lot of fear, that there's a lot of misunderstanding, but there is this misunderstanding about his role, but yeah, sort of dread about this figure that is going to possibly threaten the well-being of Christians as well. So, I mean, as you said here, would the reappearance of the Imam come as something sudden that would bring about this fear, or how should a Christian anticipate? If a Christian said, okay, I can let's, for argument's sake, accept. Okay, suppose the Mahdi will come. How should I anticipate his reappearance?
I think there are three steps that we must take. If you were to say to me, I've just had a message in my earpiece to say that the Mahdi has returned and will be in London within 3/4 of an hour, what do you think?
Yeah.
I think I would have two reactions. One is, by definition, the Mahdi comes from God.
Yeah.
He does not act of his own volition. He is the servant of God. Therefore, why should I fear him in a way that I do not fear God?
Yeah.
He is the tool, the instrument of God. So one who comes from God is one to be respected and welcomed, not one to be feared as though he were coming from outer space, planet number 72.
Yeah.
This will be the first thing. So from a Christian point of view, if the Mahdi is coming from God, why should I fear God? Secondly, every one of us, no matter what kind of a life we have lived, if we are told, the doctor says, you'll be lucky if you've 2 days to live, you are going to look back over your life and there are things that you are going to say, my word, when I have to give an account to God for what I have done, for what I have not done, for what I've said, for what I've not said, wow, that's going to be a pretty staggering experience. Now, in that sense, we should all fear God, because who could not fear? What mortal being could not fear coming into the presence of infinite mercy, of infinite goodness, of infinite justice, of love, of infinite mercy and wisdom? We would be ridiculously stupid people if we said, oh, I wouldn't tremble at that prospect.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there is a sense in which, of course, one should tremble at the thought. The return of al-Mahdi brings closer the final revelation of God upon the earth, and if we take the principle that we spoke of earlier and of a correction in those things in which you have gone astray, well, there is a sense of comeuppance.
Yes, that's a good point.
The third point, I think, is an important one to touch on, and that is that there are people who hear the rhetoric today. Islam, world domination.
Yeah.
Bring the whole world under the heel, under the jackboot of Islam. This sort of way of thinking.
Yeah.
And of course, if people then link that to the return of Imam al-Mahdi, he becomes the leader of the jackbooted Muslims.
Yeah.
And, well, we really don't want them marching down our street. So there is a sense in which people can build up an anxiety, a fear in the wrong sense here.
Yeah.
Added to that, we always have to remember that when we are touching on questions of religion, we're touching on very deep streams within the human consciousness. And there are Christians, as there are Muslims, who will be very exclusivist in their way of looking. And they will say, if it is not of us, it is outside my community, it is outside my experience, it is outside even the realm of that which is godly.
Yeah.
And so you will have people in both communities who would speak about these events as though there was a term of evil as opposed to a term of the agent of God amongst us.
Yeah. So we definitely have a lot of work to do in clearing up a lot of these misconceptions, and in the next program we will be discussing how we can do that. I wanted to thank you for your time for today's program. Definitely a lot of food for thought there for our viewers. Thank you very much. Thanks for watching. We will see you in the next program, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.